The blood on her fingers had dried to the color of rust, cracking in the creases of her knuckles as she scrubbed the stone floor of the pack's veterinary clinic. 3 years of this. 3 years since the raid that burned her parents alive in their home, and Sarah Voss had not shifted once. Her wolf was silent. Not sleeping, not dormant. Silent the way a room is silent after someone stops screaming. The mop water had gone pink again. She changed it twice already tonight, but the clinic floor held blood the way old wood holds rain. A she-wolf had come in at dusk, her side torn open by a rogue's claws during a border skirmish, and though the pack healer had stitched the wound closed, the blood had found every crack in the flagstone. Sarah could smell it beneath the astringent sting of iodine. Copper and salt and something faintly sweet, like overripe fruit that she had learned, meant the bleeding went deeper than skin. She wrung the mop out her wrists, aching. The bones there were thin now. She could see the blue rivers of her veins through skin that had gone papery from 3 years of night shifts and cafeteria scraps. The Ashwood pack didn't starve her. That would be too deliberate, too much like cruelty that required effort. They simply forgot. The meal rotation sheet posted on the mess hall wall listed every pack member's name and dietary allotment. Sarah's name had been there once, in the months right after the raid, when people still remembered that the Voss family had been part of this pack for 4 generations. Then someone had reorganized the list by rank and omegas. Without wolves fell below the line. Below the line meant you ate what was left after everyone else had been served. What was left most nights was cold rice, and whatever vegetable had gone soft in the walk-in cooler. She heard footsteps in the corridor. Heavy, deliberate. The kind of footsteps that expected the world to rearrange itself around them. Garrett Cole. The pack's head beta filled the doorway. He had a way of standing in door frames that turned them into checkpoints. Thick arms, folded chin, tilted, so he could look down the straight line of his nose at whoever was unlucky enough to be on the other side. Still here. Not a question. He said it the way someone might note a stain they thought had been cleaned. The floor needed a 3rd pass, Sarah said. She kept her voice, flat her eyes on the mop. 3 years had taught her the geometry of survival in Ashwood. Do not look Garrett in the eye. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not, under any circumstances, remind anyone that her father had once been 3rd enforcer of this pack, that her mother had run the pack's school, that Sarah herself had shown every sign of an early shift before the raid turned her into whatever she was now, a wolfless omega who scrubbed floors in a veterinary clinic at 11 o'clock at night. Alpha Regent Hale wants the East Wing cleared by dawn, Garrett said. The delegation arrives tomorrow. Sarah's hand tightened on the mop handle. What delegation? Garrett's lip curled. It was not quite a smile. The Alpha King is making rounds of the northern territories. Ashwood is his last stop. So everything needs to look like we're not the backwater, we actually are. He paused and something shifted in his expression. Not softness, exactly. More like the faint recognition that he was delivering information to a mop. That includes the clinic, and the storage rooms behind it, and the courtyard. Before dawn. He turned and left without waiting for a response. His footsteps retreated down the corridor, and Sarah stood in the clinic's fluorescent light, processing what he had said. The Alpha King, Cale Thorne, Lord of the Black Ridge Dominion, sovereign over every pack within 600 miles of the mountain range that bore his name. She had never seen him. Few people had outside of the inner circles of power. But the stories circulated like weather, impossible to avoid. He was the youngest Alpha King in 3 centuries. He had killed his own uncle to take the throne after the man poisoned Kyle's father. His wolf was black, enormous, and had once torn through an entire rogue battalion in a single night during the border wars. And his mate, according to every rumor Sarah had ever overheard in the clinic hallways, had never been found. She looked down at her hands, the rust-colored blood beneath her nails, the mop handle worn smooth by her grip, the east wing, the storage rooms, the courtyard. 6 hours. She started moving. By 2 a.m, her shoulders burned, and her lower back had locked into a knot she could feel with every step. The east wing was the oldest part of the Ashwood compound, built of dark timber and river stone, a century before Sarah was born, and it had been used primarily for storage since the pack outgrew it. Dust lay on every surface like grey velvet. The windowsills were furred with dead moths. She found a bird's nest behind a curtain rod, 3 desiccated eggs still nestled inside, and she removed it carefully, cupping it in her palm, and setting it outside on a ledge where it would not be crushed. She worked room by room, sweeping, mopping, wiping down surfaces with a rag soaked in vinegar and water, because the pack did not waste proper cleaning solution on areas that would only be seen once. The storage rooms behind the clinic smelled of formaldehyde and old newspaper, and she found stacks of veterinary journals from the 1980s, their covers curled and spotted with mildew. She boxed them neatly and pushed them against the back wall, where they would not be visible. It was in the last storage room, the one closest to the courtyard, that she found the crate. It was not large, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet, made of pale birchwood, sealed with iron clasps that had gone black with oxidation. It had been shoved behind a disused examination table, and the dust around it was thicker than anywhere else in the room, which meant no one had touched it in years. Sarah knew she should leave it. She had 6 hours of work to finish in 4, but there was something about the crate that snagged her attention. Not its appearance, its smell, beneath the dust and the formaldehyde, and the cold mineral scent of stone walls. The crate smelled like cedar and smoke, like the incense her mother used to burn during the solstice ceremonies, back when Sarah's family still attended them. She didn't open it. She moved it to the corner with the veterinary journals wiped down the floor beneath it, and kept working. The courtyard was the worst. Ashwood had let the flagstones crack and heave over the years, and weeds had colonized the gaps with the tenacity of survivors. Sarah pulled them by hand in the dark, her fingers going numb in the October cold, the moon a thin white sickle above the tree line. Her breath made small clouds. She could feel the cold in her teeth. By 5 a.m, she had cleared the courtyard, swept the walkways and scrubbed the stone benches until they showed their original grey beneath years of lichen. She sat on one of them to catch her breath, and that was when she felt it. A tremor. Not in the ground. In her chest. It was so faint she almost dismissed it. A flutter like a moth trapped behind her ribs. But Sarah had not felt anything from her wolf in 3 years. Not a twitch, not a whisper, not the faintest pulse of that second consciousness that every shifter carried. After the raid, after she had watched the fire consume her parents' house from the tree line, where she had been thrown by the blast, her wolf had simply stopped, like a clock whose mainspring had shattered. The pack healer had examined her. Twice. The first time he had been gentle clinical. Psychological dissociation, he said. Common in trauma survivors. The wolf retreats as a protection mechanism. It will come back. The second time, 8 months later, he had been less certain. He had pressed his fingers to Sarah's temples and closed his eyes, and stayed like that for a long time. And when he opened his eyes again, he had looked at her with an expression she recognized as pity wearing the mask of professionalism. "I cannot feel your wolf," he said. "Not dormant, not suppressed. I cannot feel it at all." And so Sarah became wolfless. Omega. Below the line. The tremor faded. She pressed her hand to her sternum, waiting, but there was nothing. Just her own heartbeat, lonely and singular the way it had been for 3 years. She went back inside and finished cleaning. Dawn came through the east wing windows like pale honey. Sarah had not slept, but sleeplessness had become a familiar country, and she navigated it by routine. She washed her face in the clinic's utility sink, changed from her stained work clothes into the one clean dress she kept in her locker, a grey cotton thing that had been donated to the PAC's charity bin, and that Sarah had taken before anyone else could. It was too large in the shoulders and too short at the hem, but it was clean. She braided her hair with damp fingers. It was dark, nearly black, and it had grown long over the past 3 years, because haircuts required either money or the willingness to ask someone for a favor, and Sarah had neither. By 7, the compound was awake, and humming with a nervous energy she had never seen before. Wolves who normally slouched through the corridors in sweats and bare feet were dressed in PAC formal dark shirts and pressed trousers, their hair combed, their postures military. The mess hall had been transformed. White tablecloths, actual plates instead of the usual metal trays. Someone had found wildflowers and arranged them in mason jars at each table, and the effect was so foreign that Sarah stood in the doorway for a moment, disoriented, as if she had stumbled into the wrong PAC's territory. "Move," someone said behind her, and she stepped aside as a group of warriors pushed past, carrying additional chairs. She found a corner of the kitchen and ate standing up, cold oatmeal from the pot, scooped into a bowl that she held close to her body, so no one would see her eating something that was technically above her allotment. The oats were gummy and unsalted, but they were warm, and warmth was a currency she hoarded. The Alpha King's convoy arrived at noon. Sarah was in the clinic when she heard it, the rumble of engines' first heavy vehicles moving in formation through the gravel drive. Then voices too many to distinguish a rising murmur of deference and anxiety that carried even through the clinic's thick walls, and beneath all of it, a sound that Sarah felt more than heard. A presence, like pressure, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm, when the air becomes heavy and charged, and your skin prickles with the knowledge that something enormous is about to happen. She should have stayed in the clinic. That was the protocol for Omegas during official visits. Stay out of sight. Do not embarrass the PAC by revealing that Ashwood had members who scrubbed floors for a living. But the tremor was back. Stronger this time, not a moth, but a fist pressing outward from behind her ribs with a force that made her gasp. She dropped the mop. Her hand went to her chest. Beneath her palm, something moved. 3 years of silence. 3 years of nothing, and now her wolf was stirring, pressing against the inside of her like an animal waking in a too small cage, and Sarah could feel it, really feel it, the heat and the hunger and the raw, desperate urgency of a creature that had been buried alive and was now clawing toward the surface. She stumbled out of the clinic. Through the corridor past the storage rooms she had cleaned hours ago, out into the courtyard she had weeded by moonlight. The sun was high and cold, and the courtyard was full of people, warriors in black, PAC members in their nervous finery, and in the center of it all standing beside Alpha Regent Hale, like a shadow cast by a much larger sun, was a man she had never seen but recognized immediately. Not by his face, by the way the air around him bent. Kyle Thorne was not what the stories described. The stories talked about size and strength and ferocity, and those things were true. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, built with the kind of dense, functional muscle that came from years of shifting and fighting, not from vanity. His hair was black and cut close to his skull, and a scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a thin white line that looked like it had been made by a blade rather than claws. His eyes were amber. Not brown, not gold. Amber like fossilized light, like something ancient trapped in something clear. But what the stories missed, what they could never capture, was the stillness. Cale Thorne stood in the center of a crowded courtyard, surrounded by armed warriors and pack leaders competing for his attention, and he was perfectly, completely still. Not the stillness of restraint, the stillness of a predator that does not need to prove it is dangerous. Sarah stopped at the edge of the courtyard. Her wolf was throwing itself against her ribcage now, and she pressed both hands to her chest, terrified, because this had not happened in 3 years, and she didn't know how to contain something she had forgotten she carried. And then Kyle turned his head, not toward the Alpha Regent who was mid-sentence, not toward his own warriors who flanked him in a practiced formation. He turned toward the edge of the courtyard, toward the narrow gap between the clinic wall and the old timber frame of the east wing, where a thin woman in a grey dress stood with her hands pressed to her sternum, and her dark hair escaping its braid, and her blue eyes wide with something between terror and recognition. He looked at her, and the world stopped. It was not romantic. It was not gentle. It was a collision. Sarah felt the mate bond hit her like a wall of sound, like standing too close to a bell when it rings, vibrating through every bone and every nerve, until she could not tell the difference between her body and the sound itself. Her wolf howled. Actually howled inside her, a sound she had not heard in 3 years, and it was raw and broken and desperate and triumphant all at once. Kyle's nostrils flared. She saw it from 30 feet away, the slight widening of those amber eyes, the way his jaw tightened as if he had been struck. His wolf. She could feel his wolf, a vast, dark presence, pressing against his skin, and it was focused entirely on her, with an intensity that made her knees buckle. The Alpha Regent was still talking. Something about territorial boundary adjustments and lumber rights. He had not noticed that the Alpha King was no longer listening. "Who is that?" Kyle's voice cut through the courtyard noise like a blade through paper. Low. Quiet. The kind of quiet that does not need volume because it carries the weight of absolute authority. Alpha Regent Hale followed Kyle's gaze. Sarah watched the blood leave his face. "That is no one of consequence, Your Majesty. A wolfless Omega. She cleans the clinic. Her name? Sarah Voss. She lost her family in the Thornfield raid 3 years ago. Her wolf never came back. She's nothing, Your Majesty. If she's bothering you, I'll have her removed." Kyle was already moving, not walking, moving with the controlled fluidity of a predator that has identified its target and is closing the distance. His warriors shifted behind him, confused, reaching for weapons by instinct, before recognizing that their king was not moving toward a threat. Or rather, he was. But not the kind they were trained to handle. Sarah could not move. Her wolf was screaming inside her, a sound she felt in her teeth and her fingernails and the soles of her feet, and her body was locked between the urge to run and the magnetic pull of the bond that was reeling her in like a fish on a line. He stopped 3 feet from her, close enough that she could smell him. Pine resin and wood smoke, and something metallic like the air after lightning strikes, and beneath all of it the warm animal musk of his wolf. He was a full head taller than her. She had to tilt her chin up to meet his eyes, and when she did, she saw something she did not expect. Rage. Not at her. She knew that instantly, the way you know fire is hot before you touch it. The rage was directed behind him at the pack that had called her nothing, at the word wolfless, at the grey dress and the thin wrists and the dark circles under her eyes that told a story of 3 years of systematic neglect. "When did you last eat a full meal?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried. Sarah blinked. Of all the first words she might have imagined from the Alpha King, those were not on the list. I had oatmeal this morning. A full meal, protein, vegetables, something that was not scraped from the bottom of a pot. She did not answer, because the truth was that she could not remember. Something moved behind Kyle's eyes. The amber darkened, and for a moment Sarah saw his wolf looking out at her through those human eyes, enormous and black, and vibrating with a possessive fury that should have terrified her, but instead made her wolf surge forward with a sound like a sob. He turned his head, just slightly, toward where Alpha Regent Hale stood, frozen in the center of the courtyard. Hale. The name landed like a stone, dropped into still water. You and I are going to have a conversation about how you treat the members of your pack. But first, he turned back to Sarah. His hand came up. Not fast, slow, deliberate, giving her time to flinch away if she chose to. She did not flinch. His fingers touched the side of her face. His skin was hot, almost feverish, and the contact sent a shock through her that she felt in the base of her spine. "You are coming with me," he said. It was not a request. "I have to finish cleaning the clinic," Sarah said, and she had no idea why she said it, except that 3 years of routine had worn grooves in her mind that were deeper than any mate bond. Something happened to his face. The hard line of his jaw softened just a fraction, and one corner of his mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile, but contained the architectural foundation of one. "The clinic," he said, "can wait." He took her hand. His palm swallowed hers completely, and his grip was gentle in a way that contradicted everything about his size and reputation. He led her across the courtyard, past the gaping pack members, past the frozen Alpha Regent, past his own warriors, who were rapidly recalibrating their threat assessment protocols. Sarah walked beside the Alpha King of the Black Ridge Dominion through her own pack's courtyard, wearing a charity bin dress and smelling of vinegar and floor polish, with her wolf howling inside her for the first time in 3 years. She had no idea what was happening, but for the first time since the raid, she was not cold. Kyle brought her to the guest quarters that had been prepared for his visit, the finest rooms in the compound, the ones Sarah had cleaned at 4 in the morning, smelling of the cedar oil she had used on the furniture. The irony was not lost on her. He sat her in a chair by the window and disappeared into the corridor. She heard him speak to someone, his voice low and rapid, and within minutes food began arriving. Not oatmeal, not cold rice, a tray carried by a visibly trembling Omega servant, piled with roasted venison, buttered bread, a bowl of stew thick with root vegetables, and a glass of something dark red that smelled like blackberries. "Eat," Kyle said. He stood by the door, arms folded, watching her with those amber eyes. The posture was nearly identical to the way Garrett had stood in the clinic doorway the night before, but the effect was entirely different. Garrett had blocked exits. Kyle was guarding one. Sarah picked up the bread first. Her hands were shaking. She hated that the visible evidence of how far she had fallen, but she could not control it. She bit into the bread, and her eyes closed involuntarily, because it was warm, and there was actual butter, golden and slightly salted, and she had not tasted butter in so long that the flavor overwhelmed her. "Slowly," Kyle said, and his voice had changed. Softer. The way you speak to something wounded. She ate slowly. The venison was tender pink in the center, seasoned with rosemary and black pepper. The stew tasted like someone's grandmother's recipe, rich and earthy with chunks of turnip that had gone sweet from long cooking. She drank the blackberry juice and felt the sugar hit her bloodstream like a small explosion. While she ate, Kyle did not move, did not speak, did not pull out a chair and sit across from her and ask questions. He simply stood a massive sentinel between her and the door and let her eat. It was, Sarah realized, the most considerate thing anyone had done for her in 3 years. When the tray was empty, she set down her fork and looked at him. "You felt it too," she said. Not a question. "The moment I crossed the tree line into your territory." His jaw tightened. My wolf has been clawing at me for the past hour. He wants out. He wants you. I have spent the last 60 minutes keeping a 400-pound animal behind my teeth because I didn't want to terrify you in a courtyard full of people who have clearly done enough damage." "I'm not terrified," Sarah said. "You're shaking." "That's the food. I'm not used to eating this much." Something dark moved through his expression again. That controlled rage directed outward, never at her. "How long has your wolf been silent?" 3 years. Since the raid. The Thornfield raid. He said it with the weight of someone who knew its history. "Your parents were Ilara and Thomas Voss." Sarah's breath caught. "You knew them. I knew of them. Your father served as third enforcer under the previous Alpha. Your mother ran the pack school. They were killed when the Thornfield rogues firebombed the eastern residences." He paused. "The previous Alpha was killed in that raid too. That's how Howl took power. Howl was beta. Howl was beta, and in 3 years he has turned one of the North's oldest packs into something I would be ashamed to claim as a vassal territory." His eyes held hers. "How many other Omegas are living below the line?" 7. "But I'm the only one without a wolf." "You have a wolf!" She pressed her hand to her chest again. The tremor was still there, a low, constant vibration like a purring cat. "I had a wolf. It went silent after the fire. The healer couldn't find it." Kyle pushed away from the doorframe and crossed the room. He moved the way large predators move each step. Deliberate weight distributed no wasted motion. He knelt in front of her chair, which put his face level with hers, and the intimacy of it, the Alpha King of the Black Ridge Dominion, kneeling on the floor of a guest room in a backwater pack compound, made Sarah's chest constrict. "May I?" he asked and held up his hand. She nodded. He pressed his palm flat against her sternum. His hand was so large that his fingers spread from one collarbone to the other. The heat of his touch seeped through the thin cotton of her dress, and Sarah felt her wolf react. Not a tremor this time. A surge. A rising tide of something enormous and electric, pressing upward toward his hand, as if magnetized. Kyle's eyes widened. His pupils dilated until the amber was a thin ring around black. "Your wolf is not silent," he said quietly. "Your wolf is massive. It's—" "Sarah, what did the healer tell you?" "That he couldn't feel it. He couldn't feel it because it's too deep. Not dormant. Buried. Compressed, like a spring wound so tight it can't release." His fingers pressed slightly harder against her chest. "I've seen this once before. In a wolf whose power was so far beyond the pack's average that the shift would have been catastrophic. The wolf suppressed itself to survive in an environment that couldn't contain it. That doesn't make any sense. I'm an Omega." "You are not an Omega." His voice had gone very still. "Who told you that you were? Everyone. After the fire. No wolf, no rank. That's the rule. That is not my rule." He removed his hand from her chest and stood. The absence of his touch left a cold spot that ached. "I need to speak with your Alpha Regent. Stay here. Eat if you're still hungry. Sleep if you can. I'll send someone to stand outside the door. To guard me or to keep me in." That almost smile again. To keep everyone else out. He left. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Sarah sat in the chair by the window, her stomach full for the first time in years, her wolf humming behind her ribs, and her mind racing. She did not sleep. She explored the room instead, because she had cleaned it in the dark, and now she could see it properly. It was simple by royal standards, but luxurious by hers. A bed with an actual mattress, not the thin pallet she slept on in the clinic's back room. Clean sheets that smelled of lavender. A washstand with a pitcher of warm water and a bar of soap that smelled like honey and oats. She washed her face, her neck, her arms. The water turned grey in the basin, 3 years of ground-in grime, lifting from skin that was, she realized with a start, still smooth beneath the dirt. She had expected her skin to have roughened, to have become as hard and calloused as her hands. But it was soft, pale, almost luminous, as if the years of darkness had preserved something instead of destroying it. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. Dark hair, unbraided, now falling past her shoulders. Blue eyes that were too large for her thin face. A mouth that her mother had once called your grandmother's mouth. High cheekbones made sharper by weight loss, but still architecturally sound. She was not beautiful in the way pack females were beautiful, all curves and golden skin and effortless confidence. She was something else, something that looked like a pencil sketch waiting for color. She heard raised voices through the window. The courtyard was below, and she could see Kyle standing at the center of it, facing Alpha Regent Hale. Kyle had his back to the building, so she could not see his face, but she could see Hale's, and it was the color of old bone. She could not hear the words, but she could read the body language. Kyle spoke. Hale shrank. Kyle spoke again. Hale's hands came up in a gesture that was either supplication or defense. Kyle's shoulders shifted, and even from this distance, Sarah felt the wave of alpha dominance that rolled off him like heat from asphalt. Hale dropped to one knee. The pack members in the courtyard backed away. Not running, retreating the way you retreat from a sudden fire, stumbling, instinctive animal. Kyle spoke one more sentence. Then he turned and walked back toward the building, and Sarah stepped away from the window before he could look up and see her watching. She was sitting in the chair again, hands folded in her lap when he returned. He looked at her folded hands, and something passed over his face. Not pity. Recognition. The recognition of someone who understood that folded hands and downcast eyes were not meekness. They were armor. I have suspended Hale's authority, pending a full investigation, he said. My beta will oversee Ashwood until I decide what to do with this pack. You can't. It's not. They'll panic. They should panic. 7 Omegas below the line. A pack healer who apparently cannot identify a wolf that's powerful enough to flatten this building if it shifted. Infrastructure decay. Training neglect. Border vulnerability. He sat on the edge of the bed, and the wooden frame creaked under his weight. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. I've been honest with you. I know. That's why I'm asking. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Before the raid, before the fire, what do you remember about your parents? Not the public things, the private ones. The things that didn't make sense. Sarah was quiet for a long time. The wolf in her chest was still humming, and she let the vibration carry her back. 3 years of deliberate forgetting of packing memories into boxes and shoving them into the dark, and now this man with his amber eyes was asking her to open them. My mother sang, she said, at night. Not pack songs. Something older. The words weren't in any language I recognized. My father would stand outside when she sang. He'd face the tree line, like he was watching for something. Did she sing to you? Sometimes, when I had nightmares. She would put her hand on my chest the way you did, and sing, and the nightmares would just dissolve. Like smoke. Kyle's expression was very still. Did either of them ever mention the Argent bloodline? The word hit Sarah like cold water. No. What is the Argent bloodline? The ruling line that preceded me. 3 centuries ago, before the Thorn dynasty took the Blackridge throne, the continent was ruled by the Argent wolves. Silver wolves. They were rare even then. The last known Argent was my great-great-grandmother's rival, a female alpha who chose to abdicate rather than go to war. She disappeared into the northern territories. No one ever found her descendants. He paused. The Argent Wolves were known for 3 things: healing by touch, songs that could calm any wolf, and a shift so powerful that it had to be suppressed in childhood to prevent it from emerging before the body was ready. Sarah's mouth was dry. "You think I think your mother knew exactly what you were. I think she spent your entire childhood managing your wolf, keeping it contained, teaching it to sleep so it wouldn't come roaring out at your first shift and level everything within a mile. And I think when she died, the containment held. Too well. That's insane. Is it your pack healer couldn't find your wolf because he was looking for something normal-sized? What's actually inside you is the equivalent of trying to find the ocean by looking for a puddle." Sarah stood. The chair scraped against the floor. She needed to move to pace, because the alternative was to sit still and let this information settle, and she was not ready for it to settle. "Even if that's true," she said, "my wolf hasn't shifted in 3 years. It can't get out. I've tried. In the beginning, I tried every night. I went to the woods and I stood in the cold and I begged and nothing happened. Nothing. Because you were trying to release it gently. A wolf like yours doesn't release gently. It needs a trigger." "What kind of trigger?" He looked at her, and she saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. An alpha's call. Not just any alpha. The mate's call. The one sound powerful enough to cut through 3 years of suppression. "You want to force my wolf out?" "I want to call it. There's a difference. And if it comes out and I can't control it, then I'll be there. Simple. Absolute. As if the possibility of failure had been considered and dismissed. No wolf born of this earth is beyond my ability to hold, and yours, whatever it is my mate's wolf. It will answer to me. You don't know that. I do. The same way I knew, the moment I crossed the tree line, that the most important person in my life was somewhere in this miserable compound, wearing a dress from a charity bin and cleaning someone else's blood off a floor." His voice roughened. "I know it because my wolf has been howling your name since noon, and I did not even know your name until an hour ago." The room was quiet. Sarah stood by the window, her arms wrapped around herself, and Kyle sat on the edge of the bed, and between them, the mate bond hummed like a wire under tension. "Not tonight," she said. "I haven't slept in 30 hours. Then sleep. In here. I'll take the chair. You're the Alpha King. You can't sleep in a chair. I've slept in snow in mud in a cage when I was a prisoner of war for 3 weeks at age 19. A chair is a luxury." He stood and crossed to the chair she had vacated. He sat, stretched his legs, folded his arms, and closed his eyes. "Sleep, Sarah." She should have argued. She should have insisted on going back to the clinic, back to her pallet, back to the life that was terrible but at least predictable. Instead, she looked at the bed with its clean sheets and its actual pillows, and she looked at the Alpha King sitting in a guest room chair with his eyes closed, like a man who had decided that this was his post, and nothing short of divine intervention would move him, and she crawled onto the bed fully clothed, and was asleep within 2 minutes. She dreamed of fire, not the raid. Something older, a fire in a stone hearth in a room she had never seen, with walls of dark wood and a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. A woman sat beside the fire, her hair silver white, her eyes the color of winter sky. She was singing. The song had no words Sarah could catch, but she recognized the melody. Her mother had hummed it. Always the same melody, always incomplete, as if the ending had been lost. The silver-haired woman looked at Sarah and smiled. "There you are," she said. "We've been waiting." Sarah woke to grey light and the sound of rain. The chair by the window was empty, but there was a blanket draped over the arm where Kyle had been, and a tray of food on the side table. Toast eggs, sliced fruit, a glass of water. A note beside it, written in a hand that was surprisingly precise for a man of his size. Eat. I am dealing with Howl. I will be back by noon. Do not leave this room. That is not a request. It is because Garrett Cole has been asking questions about where you went, and I do not trust him. She ate all of it. Then she ate the second tray that arrived an hour later, carried by the same trembling Omega servant, who this time managed a small conspiratorial smile. Is it true, the servant whispered, that you're his mate? I don't know what I am, Sarah said honestly. The whole pack is talking about it. Garrett is furious. He told the warriors you used some kind of witchcraft on the king. I mopped a floor and he looked at me. The servant's smile widened. Well, it must have been a very good floor. After the servant left, Sarah paced. The wolf in her chest was louder today, a persistent pressure that made it hard to sit still. She could feel it more clearly now, its outline, its shape. Not small. Not an Omega's wolf, lean and quick and designed for submission. This was something else, entirely. Something that filled the space behind her ribs and pressed against the walls of her body and waited. She opened the window. The rain had softened to a mist, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine and the particular green-grey scent of an autumn forest after rain. She breathed it in, and her wolf breathed with her. At 11, she heard footsteps in the corridor. Heavy, but not Kyle's. She knew Kyle's footsteps already the way you learn a language without meaning to. These were faster, more agitated, with a slight drag on the left side. Garrett. The door did not open. There was a guard outside. One of Kyle's warriors, a broad-shouldered woman with cropped red hair and a scar across her throat, who had introduced herself as Talia, and who stood outside the door with the unmovable placidity of a fire hydrant. But Garrett's voice carried through the wood. Sarah, I know you're in there. She did not answer. I don't know what game you're playing, but you need to understand something. Howl has been good to this pack. He held us together after the raid. He kept us alive when the rogues were still circling. Whatever you told the king, I didn't tell him anything. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. The wolf was pushing up against her vocal cords, lending them weight. Then why is Howl on his knees in the courtyard? Why has the king suspended pack authority? You did something. You always were strange, Sarah. Your mother was strange, too. Singing those songs, burning that incense, standing in the garden in the moonlight like she was waiting for something to come down and collect her. A silence. Then quieter. And this was the part Sarah did not expect. Your mother was the only person in this pack who ever asked me how my leg was healing. He said it almost to himself. After the first rogue attack, when I took that hit to the thigh and the bone didn't set right, everyone else just expected me to tough it out. Ilara brought me soup and asked if the pain was manageable, and told me there was no weakness in admitting when something hurt. Sarah pressed her hand to the door. I should have done better by you, Garrett said. I know that. I don't know how to fix it. I don't even know if I want to. But I thought you should know that your mother was... She was kind, in a way that this pack didn't deserve. His footsteps retreated, the drag on the left more pronounced now, as if the admission had cost him the energy he usually spent hiding his limp. Sarah leaned her forehead against the door and breathed. Kyle returned at noon as promised. He looked like he had been arguing with someone for 6 hours straight, which, as it turned out, he had. Howl has been stripped of rank, he said, shaking rain from his hair. My investigation team found enough to justify removal. Misallocation of resources, failure to maintain pack welfare standards, falsified reports to the Crown about border security spending. that was actually being diverted to personal accounts. Where is he? Confined to his quarters under guard. The formal tribunal will be held at Blackridge, where he'll face charges before the council. He looked at her. You seem different. Different how? Less afraid. She considered this. I'm not less afraid. I'm just afraid of different things now. He nodded, as if this was the most reasonable thing he had heard all day. Are you ready? For what? Your wolf. The air in the room changed. Sarah felt it like a drop in temperature, a sudden crystalline clarity that sharpened every sense. The wolf in her chest went from humming to vibrating, from vibrating to pressing, from pressing to pushing, with a force that made her ribs creak. Now, it should be in a controlled environment, the clearing north of the compound. My warriors will secure the perimeter. No one will see. Except you. Except me. She thought about saying no, about saying she needed more time, more information, more certainty. But the wolf was pressing so hard now that she could feel its heartbeat separate from her own, a second rhythm, faster, fiercer, and she understood that whatever was inside her had waited 3 years, and would not wait much longer. Yes, she said. The clearing was a quarter-mile north of the compound, ringed by old-growth pines, whose trunks were thick as pillars, and whose canopy filtered the grey sky into a green underwater light. The ground was carpeted in fallen needles, soft and damp, and the air smelled of resin and wet bark and the mineral tang of the nearby river. Kyle's warriors had formed a perimeter just inside the tree line, their backs to the clearing facing outward, a wall of bodies between whatever was about to happen and the rest of the world. Sarah stood in the center of the clearing. She was barefoot. She had taken off her shoes at the edge of the trees because the earth felt important right now, the contact between her soles and the ground, the cold and the damp and the give of pine needles between her toes. Kyle stood 20 feet away. He had not shifted yet. He stood in human form, watching her with those amber eyes, and there was something in his expression she could not name. Not concern. Not anticipation. Something closer to reverence. I'm going to call your wolf, he said. It will feel like a lot of things. Pressure. Heat. Fear. Your instinct will be to fight it. Don't. What if it hurts? It will hurt. Shifting always hurts the first time, and yours has been waiting 3 years. But I will be right here, and if something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong. You can't know that. I am the Alpha King. And the way he said it was not arrogance. It was fact, delivered with the same certainty as the sun rises or water flows downhill. My howl has called wolves from the dead. Yours is not dead. Yours is the most alive thing I have ever felt. He stepped back. The air thickened. Sarah felt the shift in dominance before she heard it, a pressure drop that made her ears pop, and then Kyle threw his head back and howled. The sound was not human. It was not entirely wolf. It was something between and beyond, a frequency that bypassed ears and hit bone, vibrating through the cartilage of her ribs and the marrow of her spine and the liquid crystal of her inner ear. It was a command, but not the kind that demanded obedience. The kind that demanded truth. It reached into the locked room where her wolf had been buried for 3 years, and it did not pick the lock. It tore the door off its hinges. Sarah screamed. The pain was white and total a supernova behind her sternum, and she dropped to her knees in the pine needles as her wolf surged upward with a force that felt like being turned inside out. Her bones were moving. She could feel them, the calcified architecture of her skeleton rearranging itself, her spine lengthening her skull, reshaping her hands, splitting and reforming, and the pain was extraordinary. But beneath the pain was something else. Something she had forgotten existed. Freedom. Her wolf erupted out of her like water through a broken dam. Not slowly. Not in stages. All at once, a detonation of fur and muscle and light, and the light was the part that made Kale's warriors turn despite their orders, because it was silver. Not moonlight silver. Not metal silver. The white-hot silver of a star at its core, blinding and absolute pouring from the wolf that now stood where the thin woman in the grey dress had been. She was enormous, larger than any Omega, larger than most alphas. Her fur was silver-white, gleaming in the grey forest light, as if she generated her own illumination. Her eyes, when she opened them, were the blue of deep ice, and they were ancient. Not Sarah's eyes, the eyes of something that had been carried in her bloodline for generations, sleeping and waiting, and finally awake. Kyle had shifted. His wolf was black, massive, the size of a horse, and he stood between his warriors and the silver wolf with his hackles raised. Not in aggression, in awe. The silver wolf stood in the clearing, breathing. The pine trees around the perimeter creaked, and two of them dropped their remaining needles in a soft green rain, as if the force of the shift had shaken the earth itself. The warriors at the tree line backed away instinctively, and Talia, the red-haired guard, dropped to one knee. Sarah's mind was split. She was human, and wolf simultaneously, two consciousnesses, overlapping like transparencies on a light box. She could feel the ground through four enormous pores. She could smell everything, not just scent, but its architecture, its layers, the pine resin on the surface and the rot beneath it, the mineral of the river 1/2 mile north. Kyle's scent not just pine and smoke now, but the whole symphony, the adrenaline spiking his blood, the salt of his sweat, the warm, deep animal smell of his wolf, and beneath all of it, the mate bond, no longer a hum, but a roar. The black wolf approached the silver wolf, slowly, head lowered not in submission, but in recognition. He touched his nose to hers, and the contact sent a visible ripple through the air around them, like heat distortion above asphalt. And then the silver wolf did something no one expected. She sat down, in the middle of the clearing, surrounded by warriors and ancient pines, and the shocked silence of a forest that had just witnessed something it would remember in its rings. The silver wolf descendant of the Argent line, the most powerful creature any of them had ever seen, sat down on her haunches like a very large dog and pressed her head against the black wolf's shoulder. 3 years. 3 years of silence and starvation, and scrubbing floors and sleeping on a pallet in a clinic back room and eating cold rice and being called nothing. 3 years of a wolf buried so deep that a healer could not find it, a wolf so vast that an entire pack had mistaken its absence for weakness. The silver wolf pressed against the black wolf, and the black wolf curled around her, and they breathed together in the clearing while the rain started again, and the pine needles drifted down, and the warriors at the tree line pretended they were not watching something sacred. They stayed like that for a long time. When Sarah shifted back, she was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Kyle was beside her in human form, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. The coat was enormous on her warm smelling of him. She burrowed into it. "Silver," Kyle said. His voice was not steady, and Sarah realized with a distant shock that the Alpha King's hands were trembling. "You're a silver wolf, the first in 3 centuries. "I know. You know. My mother. In the dream. She wasn't there, but someone was. A woman with silver hair. She said they'd been waiting." Kyle pulled her closer. Not romantically. Protectively. The way you hold something precious that has just survived an earthquake. "The Argent line. You're the last living descendant. Your mother must have known. That's why she suppressed your wolf. In a pack like Ashwood, under an alpha who wasn't strong enough to handle it, your shift would have been catastrophic. So she hid me, made me look like an Omega. She saved your life, and when she died, the suppression held because your wolf understood what she had been telling it all along. Wait for someone strong enough to call you out. Sarah looked up at him. Rain was collecting in his hair, running down the scar on his face. And that's you. That appears to be the situation. Yes. She laughed. It was a cracked, exhausted, slightly hysterical sound, and it was the first time she had laughed in 3 years, and Kyle looked at her as if she had given him something he had been searching for his entire life. The next 3 days were a controlled demolition of everything Sarah had known. Kyle's investigation team dismantled Hale's administration with surgical precision. Files were opened, accounts were audited, the 7 Omegas below the line were identified, Fed examined by Kale's personal healers, and offered relocation to Blackridge if they chose. 5 accepted. 2 preferred to stay, including an elderly Omega named Maran, who had been in Ashwood for 40 years, and who told Sarah with a wry twist of her mouth that she was too old to be impressed by kings, but too smart to refuse a proper meal plan. Sarah moved into the guest quarters permanently. Kyle's warriors rotated guard duty outside her door, and food arrived 3 times a day. Real food, with variety and nutrition, and occasionally a dessert that suggested someone in the kitchen had received very specific instructions about what a recovering Omega should eat to regain weight. Kyle himself was a constant presence that respected distance. He ate meals with her. He walked with her through the compound, his stride shortened to match hers. He told her about Blackridge, about his pack, about the council politics that made his role equal parts sovereign and diplomat. He did not touch her unless she initiated it. He did not push for more than she offered. But his wolf? His wolf was another matter. She could feel it constantly, now the mate bond between them, a live wire that hummed louder when he was near and ached when he left the room. His wolf watched her through his eyes, and it was hungry. Not threatening. Hungry the way the tide is hungry for the shore, an elemental pull that was patient only because its alpha forced it to be. On the second night, Sarah woke at 3 in the morning and found Kyle sitting in the chair by the window, not sleeping, his eyes reflecting ambient light in the dark. "You don't have to watch me all night," she said. "I'm not watching you. I'm watching the tree line." Why? Because word travels fast in the north. By now, every pack within 500 miles knows that the Alpha King found his mate in a backwater compound, and that she is a silver wolf. The last silver wolf. He turned his head to look at her. In the dark, his eyes were molten. There are people who will want you for what you represent. Power, legitimacy. The Argent bloodline was the original royal line. Your existence challenges the foundation of my dynasty. And you don't care about that. I care about exactly one thing in this compound, and she is currently lecturing me about sleep hygiene from a bed I am not allowed to approach without invitation. Sarah pulled the blanket back on the empty side of the bed. It was not a grand gesture. It was practical quiet, the kind of invitation that could be accepted or declined without either party losing dignity. Kyle moved from the chair to the bed with the careful deliberation of a man handling something fragile. He lay on top of the blankets, fully clothed, his boots on the floor. The bed dipped under his weight, and Sarah felt the warmth of him radiating through the covers like a furnace. "This doesn't mean anything," she said. "It means you trust me enough to let me within arm's reach while you're unconscious. It means everything." She fell asleep to the sound of his breathing. Her wolf settled against his, like a key finding its lock. On the 3rd day, the attack came. Sarah was in the courtyard, sitting on one of the stone benches she had scrubbed clean 4 nights ago, reading a veterinary journal she had salvaged from the storage room. She had been a good student before the raid. Science, specifically. She had wanted to study animal medicine to work with the pack's injured wolves, and that dream had been buried alongside everything else. But Kyle's healer had mentioned that Blackridge had a full veterinary program, and the ember had rekindled. The first sign was the birds. They went silent all at once, the way they do before a tornado, and the absence of sound was louder than any alarm. Sarah looked up from the journal. The courtyard was nearly empty. Midday. Most of the pack was in the training grounds or the mess hall. The second sign was the smell, sulphur and old blood and something chemical, something that burned the inside of her nostrils like ammonia. Rogues. Not the scattered, desperate kind that hit borders and ran. These came, organized a wedge of 20 wolves in a formation that Sarah recognized from her father's tactical manuals, the manuals she had read in secret as a child, hidden under her bed, because girls were not supposed to be interested in warfare. They came from the south tree line, fast and silent, and they were heading directly for her. Sarah did not scream. She did not run. She dropped the journal and felt her wolf slam against her ribs with a force that doubled her over, and then she was shifting faster. This time the pain compressed into a single white-hot instant, and then she was on 4 silver paws, and the world was a symphony of scent and sound and threat assessment. The lead rogue hesitated, just for a heartbeat. A silver wolf the size of a small car had materialized where a thin woman had been sitting, and that was not in whatever briefing he had been given. Sarah's wolf didn't hesitate. She moved, not with the trained precision of a warrior, with the raw instinctive ferocity of a creature that had been caged for 3 years and was now very, very done with being small. She hit the lead rogue like a battering ram, and the impact cratered the flagstone beneath them, and the rogue's formation shattered like glass. But there were 20 of them, and she was one. 3 got behind her. She felt claws rake along her flank, tearing through the silver fur and the skin beneath, and the pain was a red scream that made her stagger. Another hit her shoulder, another went for her throat, and she twisted, catching its jaw in her teeth, feeling bone crack, but the others were circling now organized, and she realized with a cold clarity that they had expected this. They had come for the silver wolf. They knew what she was. The howl hit the clearing like a detonation. Kyle, half a mile away in the training grounds, and his howl covered the distance in an instant, a sound that was not just loud, but physical, a wall of alpha dominance that hit the rogues like a shockwave. 3 of them dropped immediately, legs buckling, throats exposed in involuntary submission. The others faltered their formation, collapsing their wolves, recoiling from a sound that was older and more powerful than anything their instincts could process. Then the black wolf hit the tree line. Kyle in wolf form was a natural disaster. He came out of the trees at a full sprint, 400 pounds of black fur and golden eyes and ancient killing intelligence, and he did not slow down. He went through the rogues like a scythe through wheat. The sounds were terrible. Sarah pressed herself against the courtyard wall, her wounded flank bleeding silver-tinged blood onto the flagstones, and she watched the Alpha King dismantle 20 trained rogues with the systematic efficiency of someone performing a task he had done many times before, and found neither thrilling nor distasteful, but simply necessary. It took less than 4 minutes. When it was over, the courtyard was a wreck of unconscious and broken wolves, and the black wolf stood in the center of the carnage, breathing hard, his muzzle dark with blood. He turned to Sarah. The transition from killing machine to concerned mate happened in the space between 2 heartbeats. The black wolf crossed the courtyard at a run, not the predator's sprint, but the frantic lope of something terrified, and he pressed his nose to her wounded flank and whined, actually whined the Alpha King of the Blackridge Dominion, making a sound of distress over a cut on a wolf he had known for 3 days. Sarah shifted back. The pain of the wound translated from flank to side, a long gash along her ribs that bled freely onto the flagstones. Kyle shifted beside her, naked and blood-covered and breathing hard. "Let me see." His hands were on her immediately pressing cloth, torn from somewhere against the wound. His eyes were still wolf gold, not yet fully transitioned back. "How deep?" "It's fine." "It is not fine. You are bleeding. On the ground. In my presence. That is the opposite of fine." "Kyle." She put her hand on his wrist. His pulse was hammering under her fingers. "Listen to me. I'm okay. It's a surface wound. It's already closing." He looked. She was right. The edges of the gash were knitting together, the skin pulling itself closed with a speed that no normal wolf could manage. Silver light flickered along the wound's edge like tiny lightning, and within 60 seconds the gash was a pink line, and then a faint scar, and then nothing. "The Argent healing," Kyle said. He sounded like a man who has been hit in the chest. "Apparently." He pulled her against him. The blood and the dirt and the cold flagstones and the unconscious rogues and the warriors now pouring into the courtyard with drawn weapons, all of it faded into irrelevance, because Cale Thorne was holding her, as if the earth might open and try to take her. And his arms were shaking, and his face was buried in her hair, and he was saying her name. Just her name. Over and over. Like a prayer he had only just learned. The aftermath was swift. Kyle's warriors secured the rogues. Those still conscious were restrained and interrogated on the spot, and the story that emerged was ugly, but unsurprising. They had been sent by a northern pack leader named Draven, a wolf who had long contested the Thorne dynasty's legitimacy, and who had heard the rumors of a silver wolf in Ashwood. Draven wanted the last Argent, not as a mate, as a weapon, a political tool to challenge Cale's claim to the throne. "He will try again," Kyle said. They were in the guest quarters. He had cleaned the blood from his hands and face, but not from his soul. Sarah could see it in his eyes, the cold calculation of a king assessing a threat to his mate. This was a probe, to test your strength, to test mine. Then we shouldn't be here. Sarah was standing by the window again, the now familiar window, with its view of the courtyard, that she had scrubbed by moonlight a lifetime ago. Ashwood can't defend against a full assault. "No, it can't." He looked at her. "Come to Blackridge." "As what?" "As mine." The word hung in the air. Not a title, not a role. Something more fundamental. A claim that predated kings and councils and territories that went back to the first wolves who ran together under the first moon and chose each other and meant it. The pack won't accept a wolfless Omega as their queen. You are not a wolfless Omega. You are a silver wolf of the Argent bloodline, the most powerful shifter I have encountered in my life, and you just fought off 20 rogues in a courtyard before I could even arrive. He paused. And even if you were a wolfless Omega who cleaned veterinary clinics, you would still be mine. And any member of my pack who had a problem with that would be welcome to discuss it with me personally. Kyle. Sarah. I need you to understand something. She turned from the window. Her eyes were dry. Her voice was steady. I am not grateful to you. I am not indebted to you. I am not a rescue story. What I am is a woman who survived 3 years of hell by her own stubbornness, and is now being asked to walk into a palace and become a queen, and I need you to want me for something more than what my bloodline represents. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Then Kyle laughed, not the political laugh of a king, smooth and calibrated, a real laugh, rough-edged and surprised, as if she had said something he had been waiting to hear without knowing it. Sarah Voss, he said. I have 17 pack alliances, 3 territorial disputes, an ongoing conflict with a northern insurgent, and a council that has been pressuring me to take a political mate for the past 5 years. I do not need the Argent bloodline. I do not need a silver wolf. What I need is someone who, when presented with the most powerful alpha in 600 miles, responds by telling him she has to finish cleaning the clinic. I was in shock. That was you. Exactly you. Stubborn. Practical. Completely unimpressed by power. Do you know how rare that is? I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who want something from me. You looked at me and worried about a mop. She pressed her lips together to keep from smiling, and failed. Come to Blackridge, he said again. Not as a symbol, not as a political asset, as my mate, my equal. My queen, if you want the title, but I would take you without it. Tomorrow. That's fast. I have waited 28 years for you. Tomorrow is not fast enough. She looked at him, the scar on his face, the amber eyes that watched her like she was the only light source in a dark room, the hands that had killed 20 wolves to protect her, and then shook while pressing a cloth to her wound. Tomorrow, she said. They left at dawn. The convoy that had arrived 4 days ago with an Alpha King on a routine inspection departed with a queen-elect, a suspended pack leader under guard, and enough political upheaval to keep the northern territories gossiping for a decade. Sarah rode in the lead vehicle beside Kyle, wearing clothes that had been sourced from somewhere overnight. Not a grey charity dress, dark blue wool, tailored warm with a high collar that framed her face and made her blue eyes vivid. She did not look back at Ashwood. She looked forward at the mountain range, rising from the mist like a spine of stone, and the road that climbed toward it, and the future that she could not see but could feel in her bones like the first vibration of a shift. Blackridge was not what she expected. The stories described a fortress, dark stone iron gates, towers designed for defense rather than beauty. What Sarah saw as the convoy crested the final ridge was a city, built into the mountain itself, its structures carved from the black granite that gave it its name. Blackridge sprawled across the mountainside in tiers. The lower levels held the markets and workshops and homes, their windows glowing warm in the grey afternoon. The middle tiers held the administrative buildings, the training grounds, the council chambers, and at the summit, carved into the peak like a crown on a skull, was the palace. It was beautiful. Not in the ornamental way of southern packs with their gardens and fountains. Beautiful in the way that mountains are beautiful, stark and permanent, and completely indifferent to whether you approved. Home, Kyle said. He was watching her face. It's enormous. It's been waiting for a queen. The pack gathered to receive them. Hundreds of wolves lining the main road, up through the tiers, their eyes tracking the convoy with the alert attention of a pack meeting its alpha's mate for the first time. Sarah felt their scrutiny like a physical weight. She straightened her spine. The whispers started when she stepped out of the vehicle. She heard them the way she heard everything now, her senses sharpened by the shift layered and distinct. That's her. She's so thin. Silver Wolf, her. The Alpha King's mate is a clean-up girl from Ashwood. Kyle placed his hand on the small of her back, not possessively, supportively, a point of warmth and steadiness in a sea of judgment. They walked through the city, up through the tiers past the markets, where butchers and bakers and blacksmiths paused in their work to stare past the training grounds, where warriors in their fighting forms watched with pricked ears past the council chambers, where officials emerged in their formal robes and tried to mask their shock with protocol. At the palace entrance, a woman was waiting, tall, dark-haired, with the kind of rigid posture that suggested either military training or a lifetime of being watched. She wore white, and her expression was polished to a high shine. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing to Cale. "Welcome home." Her eyes moved to Sarah and performed an assessment so rapid and thorough that Sarah could almost hear the calculations clicking. "And this must be your guest?" "My mate," Kyle said. "Sarah, this is Councillor Lyra Vane. She has been overseeing domestic affairs in my absence." "Lady Vane," Sarah said. "Just Councillor." The correction was quick automatic and delivered with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "We have prepared quarters. I assumed she would be in the East Wing." "She will be in the Queen's chambers," Kyle said. "Adjacent to mine." A flicker crossed Lyra's face. Just a flicker. But Sarah caught it, and she filed it away with the same careful attention she had once given to Garrett's moods and Hale's schedules. Survival instincts didn't turn off just because the scenery improved. "Of course," Lyra said. "I'll see to it personally." The Queen's chambers were a revelation, an enormous room with vaulted ceilings of dark stone, a bed that could sleep 4, a fireplace large enough to stand in, and windows that looked out over the entire valley. The furniture was old and heavy, carved from dark wood that had been oiled until it gleamed. The rugs were thick wool in deep reds and golds, and on the wall above the mantelpiece, a painting. A wolf, silver-white, standing on a mountain peak with the moon behind her. "That's been there for 300 years, Kyle said from the doorway, "since the last Argent wolf walked these halls." Sarah looked at the painting. The wolf in it had the same blue eyes she saw in the mirror each morning. "I dreamed of a woman," she said. "Silver-haired." She said they had been waiting. The Argent wolves believed that their line would return when it was needed most. He stepped into the room. The Thorn dynasty has held this territory for 3 centuries. Good rulers, mostly. But the kingdom has been fracturing. Draven in the north, separatists in the east, packs pulling away from the central authority because they have lost faith in the crown's ability to protect them. He stopped beside her, looking at the painting. A silver wolf. The return of the Argent line. It's not just a mate bond, Sarah. It's a sign. To every pack on this continent. I'm not a sign, I'm a person. You're both, so am I. He touched her hand. We do not get to choose what we symbolize. We only get to choose what we do. The marking ceremony was held 3 days later. Not a grand political affair, as Lyra had suggested, with invitations to allied packs and council dignitaries and weeks of preparation. Kyle scheduled it for a Thursday evening in the palace's inner courtyard, with only the Blackridge pack present, and Lyra's eyebrow raised so high it nearly left her face. "This is irregular," she said. "The council will expect formal proceedings." "The council can expect whatever it likes," Kyle said. "I am marking my mate in front of my pack under the moon, the way it has been done since before there were councils." Sarah stood in the inner courtyard as the sun went down. She wore a dress someone had made for her in 3 days, white wool with silver thread at the collar and cuffs, and it fit her properly, which was a novel experience. Her hair was down clean and brushed, falling in dark waves, around a face that had already begun to change with 3 days of proper food and sleep. The sharp edges were softening. The shadows under her eyes were fading. She looked less like a sketch and more like a portrait in progress. The pack filled the courtyard, hundreds of them silent, watchful, their breath making clouds in the cold evening air. Whatever they thought of their alpha's mate, whatever whispers had circulated in the 3 days since her arrival, they were here. That mattered. Kyle stood facing her. He had not dressed formally. He wore what he always wore, black, simple, functional. The scar on his face caught the last light. "In front of my pack," he said, his voice carrying through the courtyard without effort, I claim this woman as my mate, my equal, my queen. Her wolf is the silver wolf of the Argent line. Her name is Sarah Voss, and she is the bravest person I have ever met, and if anyone here has an objection, I invite them to voice it now, so I can give them my full and undivided attention. No one objected. Sarah. He stepped closer. His eyes were molten amber, his wolf pressing against his skin so hard she could see it rippling beneath the surface. Do you accept the bond? She looked at him, at the king who had knelt on a guest room floor to check on a stranger's wolf, who had slept in a chair to guard her door, who had fought 20 rogues and then trembled while pressing cloth to her wound. I accept the bond, she said. He bent to her neck. His mouth was warm. She felt his teeth press against the skin where her shoulder curved into her throat, the place where the mark would live, and she closed her eyes. The bite was sharp and deep and burned like lightning. She gasped her hands, gripping his arms, her nails digging into the muscle. The pain lasted 3 seconds. Then it transformed, spreading outward from the bite in a wave of warmth that flooded every cell, every nerve, every dormant corner of her being. The mate bond, which had hummed between them for days, locked into place with an almost audible click, like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting 3 centuries. Her wolf surged. She felt it press against Kyle's wolf through the bond, and the contact was not gentle. It was fierce and complete and permanent, 2 wolves intertwined at the soul level, and the pack in the courtyard felt it. She knew because she heard them, a sound that started low and built a collective howl, rising from hundreds of throats, simultaneously, a sound of recognition and acceptance, and welcome that echoed off the stone walls and the mountain peaks and the cold October sky. Sarah opened her eyes. Cale's forehead was pressed to hers, his hands cradling her face, his breath unsteady. Mine, he said. Yours, she agreed. But I'm still not going to be impressed by you. That rough, surprised laugh again. He kissed her, and the courtyard erupted, and the howling went on, and somewhere in the sound, Sarah could hear a melody. Old and wordless and incomplete, the song her mother used to sing, carried now on the voices of a pack she barely knew, but that was already impossibly home. The weeks that followed were not a fairy tale. Fairy tales skip the parts where the Queen-elect sits through 12-hour council sessions learning tax policy. They skip the part where Draven's emissary arrives with a formal challenge to the marking, citing irregular bloodline verification procedures, and Cale responds by inviting Draven to come to Blackridge personally and verify Sarah's bloodline by watching her wolf pin his to the ground. Draven does not come. They skip the part where Lyra Vane, whose rigid efficiency Sarah had initially read as hostility, turns out to be someone considerably more complicated. Lyra had been in love with Cale. Everyone knew it. She had served as his counselor for 6 years, managing the domestic affairs of the kingdom, with a competence that bordered on obsessive, and she had never spoken a word of her feelings, because she had known, with the clinical precision that defined her, that Cale's mate was out there somewhere, and that Lyra was not her. Sarah found her in the library one evening, sitting in a window seat with a glass of wine and a stack of agricultural reports, and Lyra looked up with an expression that was too tired for masks. I don't hate you, Lyra said. I want to. It would be simpler. But I watched you sit through council today, and you took notes and you asked about the grain subsidy, and you didn't once look at Kyle for approval before you spoke. So I don't hate you. I respect you, which is considerably more inconvenient. I know about your feelings for him, Sarah said. Everyone knows. It's not a secret, it's just irrelevant. She sipped her wine. He was never going to choose anyone but his mate. I knew that. I stayed anyway because the work matters, and because I am very good at it, and because loving someone who can't love you back is only tragic if you let it define you. That sounds like something you've rehearsed. Lyra's mouth twitched. I have been rehearsing it for 6 years. It should sound polished by now. What if I need a counselor who isn't in love with my mate? Then you would need to find someone half as competent and twice as boring. I don't recommend it. It was not friendship. Not yet. But it was honesty, and Sarah had learned in 3 years of Ashwood that honesty was rarer and more valuable than kindness. The formal coronation happened in December, on the winter solstice, when the moon was full and the mountains were white with snow. This one was the political affair Lyra had wanted. Delegations from every pack on the continent, council members in their ceremonial robes, a feast that lasted 3 days and required the collective output of every kitchen in Blackridge. Sarah wore silver. Not white, as tradition demanded. Silver because she was an argent wolf, and she was done pretending to be anything else. The dress was simple in design and devastating in effect, a column of silver fabric that caught the torchlight and fractured it into 1,000 tiny stars. Her hair was braided with silver thread, and around her neck on a chain so delicate it was nearly invisible hung a single pendant. A wolf carved from bone that she had found in the birchwood crate in Ashwood's storage room. Her mother's, she was certain of it. Kyle placed the crown on her head in front of 1,000 witnesses. It was not heavy. She had expected it to be heavy, but it was light-wrought silver in the shape of a crescent moon, and it fit as if it had been made for her. Because it had. 3 centuries ago for the last Argent Queen, and it had waited in the palace treasury, growing tarnished and forgotten until now. "Long live the Queen," Kyle said, and his voice was thick, and Sarah saw that his eyes were bright. "Long live the Queen." The hall repeated, 1,000 voices, becoming one. The feast that followed was noise and warmth and politics. Sarah shook hands and received bows and navigated conversations that were equal parts congratulation and assessment. She danced with Kyle, who moved with surprising grace for his size. She danced with council members and allied alphas and a 12-year-old pup from a southern pack who had been dared by his friends and whose face was so red that Sarah spent the entire dance talking to him about his favorite subject, which turned out to be river fishing until his color returned to normal. She did not see Garrett, who was still in Ashwood, or Hale, who was awaiting tribunal. She did not look for them. There were some chapters that did not need a closing scene. Late that night, after the feast had wound down, and the delegations had retreated to their quarters, and the halls of Blackridge were quiet, except for the settling of old stone in the cold. Sarah stood on the balcony of the Queen's chambers and looked out over the valley. Snow was falling, small flakes barely visible drifting through the dark like scattered stars. The city below was dark, except for the occasional warm glow of a window. The mountains beyond were black shapes against a blacker sky. Kyle came up behind her. She felt him before she heard him, the bond between them, a constant low frequency, like the hum of a power line. He wrapped his arms around her from behind his chin, resting on the top of her head. He was warm. He was always warm. They stood there, not speaking. The snow fell. The mountains held their silence, and somewhere inside Sarah, in the place where her wolf lived, a silver wolf pressed against a black wolf, in a space that was entirely their own, and the melody her mother had never finished played on note by note, finding its ending at last. Below them in the courtyard, she could not see from this angle a single wolf howled, then another, then another. The sound built and layered, rising through the tiers of the city pack voices, joining one by one until the entire mountain was singing. Sarah closed her eyes. The crown was a light pressure on her brow. Kyle's heartbeat was steady against her back. The snow melted on her upturned face, each flake a small, cold kiss that dissolved into warmth. She did not think about the grey dress, or the mop bucket, or the cold oatmeal, or the 3 years of silence. She did not think about what came next, the politics, and the threats, and the long work of becoming a queen. She thought about nothing at all. She just listened.